What's up, guys? This is Rey-Jay back with another video. And in this one, I want to break down what's happening with SPY, Tesla, and the broader markets. Just know that I am not a financial planner, so take nothing I'm saying as financial advice whatsoever. And also, if you guys can, please check out my Moomoo link that's down below or use my QR code right here to sign up. If you sign up for Moomoo, the link down below and deposit $100, you're going to get $20 for free Nvidia stock. If you deposit $2,000, you're going to get $50 worth of Nvidia. Deposits $10,000 to get $300 worth of the stock for free, or deposits $50,000 to get $1,000 of free Nvidia. You're also going to qualify for a 3.6% APY base rate plus a 4.5% APY extra for 3 months, making it a total of an 8.1% APY extra for 3 months. The offer ends very, very soon, so please check out my link down below to sign up or use this QR code. Anyways, now let's talk about what's happening with the markets. So on our SPY chart, on the 30 minutes time frame, we had this very, very nice looking inverse head and shoulders like structure that was developing. But instead of holding our key support at 668 for there to be hope for bulls, we lost support. We did not hold 668 today. We basically held it for the first 4 hours. But as time went on, we ended up breaking support and we saw this thing start to dip. This is not the best of signs for bulls. And this is indicative of the possibility of more downside because one thing that's happening is that ever since October, the end of October, SPY has been downtrending. We just keep making lower highs and lower lows. And this also resembles a head and shoulders now. And we have this support that's very vital near 660. I'm not sure if we hold this because we keep touching this, touching this, touching this. We might break support. And if we lose 660, I think that these lows from October will be retested, taking us back down towards the 650s. Now, if we do get some kind of big pullback like this, it's very possible the market still tries to get some kind of big bounce with the end of the year coming because of the Fed easing on policy. But the question remains, will the Fed ease on policy? Will they help the market bounce by, once again, injecting more liquidity into the systems indirectly, right? They're not going to just directly start turning on the money printer. They could indirectly do this to some extent by buying back treasury bonds because that will help to inject more liquidity. And by doing that, that's the Fed essentially easing up on policy. That could be very, very bullish for the end of the year. But of course, we're waiting for confirmation. We don't know for sure. And that's why the market is selling off. We had some big news that came out from the Fed. Let's talk about this. Let me just scroll up to when we had Jefferson from the Fed speaking. The Federal Reserve Vice Chair Philip Jefferson on Monday said that he sees risks to the labor market as skewed to the downside. This is very important. He says that he sees the balance of risks in the economy as having shifted in recent months with increased downside risks to employment compared to the upside risks to inflation. Then he talked about how, once again, he talked about the options of whether they're going to be easing or not. But here's the most important thing. I'm going to scroll down to this part right here. What Jefferson said is that there is a lack of progress when it comes to inflation, and it appears to be due to the tariff effects, with signs that inflation, excluding the effects of the tariffs, may be continuing to make real progress towards 2%. Meaning that he's saying it's because of the tariffs that inflation appears so sticky right now. But if they exclude the tariffs, they are making progress when it comes to that. But when it comes to the outlook of policy, it's going to be guided by data and it's going to be taken on a meeting by meeting approach to decide policy, meaning that it depends on the data. The Fed is not too certain about if they're going to be cutting or not. And that is what is spooking the markets to some extent, because instead, before, we used to have a 90% chance of getting a cut in December. It went down to 60% last week. At the end of last week, it went down to 45%. Now it's at 42%. There's a 42% chance we get a cut of 25 basis points in December, 57% chance they're going to keep rates the same. We need to get the right pieces of data, more weakness in the labor markets, even like decent inflationary data could really benefit this. And that's going to give the Fed more evidence to start cutting even more. So we don't know if the Fed's going to cut or not. Before, it seemed like there was a very good chance the Fed was going to cut, but because of the government shutdown and the lack of data, the Fed lacks certainty. So if the market continues to dump and if we end up retesting the October lows, it's very possible that could be a buying opportunity, because if the Fed does end up cutting and if the Fed ends up easing on policy like they said they likely would, they may have to do this because of what's happening with the labor market, as they have a very important mandate to manage both sides of the coin. So if we end up seeing more bad jobs data and we keep on seeing the economy taking a hit, of course, the Fed's going to be incentivized to start easing up. And that could be what helps the market bounce in December. It's a possibility, We will see just to be safe. I don't want to get way too ahead of myself in saying that, but that's why if we do get a big dump like this, it may be a very, very big buying opportunity. So I'll talk more about that later on. For now, we're just going to take it one step at a time and just know there is still some downside risk. Speaking of data, I just want to talk about something very important. Okay, so when you have a government shutdown, a lot of data is not going to be collected, and simultaneously, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, they do not just release all the data just like that. It's going to take them time. There's going to be a process for them to start collecting data and release it. That's why, despite tomorrow being Tuesday, November 18th, 2025, despite the government shutdown ending for almost a week, right? We don't really have too much data coming out yet. In the morning, we have the ADP employment data at 8:15 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Then we have some data coming out involving our Fed services activity at 8:30 a.m. And that's pretty much it for data. Everything else is more minor. But a lot of the export and import data is not going to be coming out because we're still waiting for the next schedule and the next collection from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And then on top of this, on Wednesday, that's going to be a very important day for the markets because there is big data coming out for Wednesday because the FOMC minutes is going to be coming out. The Fed still functions even if the government is in a shutdown mode. So the Fed has been continuing to function. They're going to give us more insights, meaning that on Wednesday, the Fed will give us big data from the minutes reports. This is not FOMC, it's simply just a paper report about FOMC to give us more insights from the Fed. So Wednesday is going to be very big at 2 p.m. with big data coming out. And simultaneously, on Wednesday, we have Nvidia's earnings. For Monday, it's going to be very, very quiet, very minor earnings. For Tuesday, we have like the Home Depot and a few more. But Wednesday is going to be very big as we have Target and lots of retail in the morning, then Nvidia after market close, and Walmart for Thursday. But Nvidia, the big dog Nvidia is going to be the biggest one for Wednesday, so be ready for that. Finally, when it comes to the overall market, just know that right now there's a lot of fear, there's a lot of panic in the markets, there's a lot of fear and uncertainty about the Fed. Extreme fear makes up the majority of sentiment right now. Momentum is at extreme fear, and our put to call option ratio is at extreme fear as we're seeing a lot of fear coming out. The VIX is also breaking out, which makes me suspect there's going to be more downside coming. So my view has changed. I don't think we're ready for a bottom yet. I think the bottom is coming soon if we end up losing some key supports. But for the short term, there could be a small bounce on SPY before we continue to fall. So let's break down my prediction of what do I think is going to happen heading into tomorrow. Well, notice something very evident. Okay, SPY is kind of like a yo-yo. It's going back and forth like a yo-yo, jumping between different levels. I say that because we're basically bouncing of the 660 to 663 area. We bounced here, and we bounced here, which makes me suspect we might attempt to go a little bit higher on SPY for like 668 to 670. But here's the thing. As we try to bounce near 660, we keep on making lower highs. So we bounce, reject, bounce, reject, bounce, reject. We keep making lower highs, which is a bad sign for bulls. This also is quite evident that first, we had this trend line as resistance. Then we started to test these EMAs as resistance. I think this was very close to our golden pocket. And then we also came short of getting a big bounce and we got another rejection. Instead of holding the next golden pocket near 668, we lost it. So this makes me suspect that even if we bounce a little bit tomorrow for 668 to 670, we might just get another rejection, retest 660. And if that fails us, watch for confirmation first, but if that fails us, the low right here at 650 could be retested. 650 to 655 will likely be tested. The lowest we saw from mid-October. I think those lows could be retested. And then we're going to see if that is where the market forms a bottom because this is very strong support. And we're going to see if we get a big bounce for the month of December because of the Fed easing on policy, which is most likely going to happen. But of course, it depends on the data, so we don't know for sure. It depends on a lot of different things. So that's what I'm essentially looking at, a move like this on SPY. We're going to see if we bounce off these levels, but just keep that in mind. We don't know for sure. We're going to be very patient. So what's happening for tomorrow? We're going to take it one step at a time, keep it simple. Tomorrow, look for a small bounce here since we have these wicks forming a double bottom on SPY. And I think we could be looking for an attempt to rebound off this for 668 to 670. Even if we rebound a bit, history tells us we just keep on rejecting on SPY, and we could turn right back down and continue to decline for 660. I think this is the most likely possibility for SPY for the next day or two. All right, so look for a bounce tomorrow. If we lose 663 on SPY, look for 660. If 660 fails us, we could dump a lot more. But if we reclaim 672, we could attempt to turn more bullish. In fact, we have to get back above these EMAs to be bullish. As of right now, it looks like 668 to 670 could be tested. And if we keep making lower highs, there's going to be a risk of us dumping back down towards 660 or below. On the QQQ, the same thing is going on. We're making lower highs, lower highs, lower highs, and lower highs. If we break past 612, we're looking for a big move up. But if we lose 598, we're looking more bearish on the QQQ. Notice the QQQ also has a left shoulder, a head, and a right shoulder, and it looks like we failed to hold above the key level I called out in the morning. So I do think we could bounce a bit for 608 to 610, but there could be another rejection and a retest of 598. And if that fails us, we're going to be looking for these lows to be retested back down to 590, if not 585. And then we're going to see if we bounce or not. But the triple Q still favors downside. We're making lower highs. We have a head and shoulders, and the downside risk is there. Tomorrow, the QQQ might bounce for 608. I think it's possible we bounce a little bit, but every time we bounce on the QQQ since the month started, we just reject. We bounce, reject, bounce, reject, bounce, reject, bounce, reject. This time we could bounce, then reject again, and turn right back down. It's very possible that is going to be the case. For other tickers, let me just call this out. We have the VIX right here. So I'm calling out the VIX because look at this, guys. We have a left shoulder, a head, and a right shoulder for an inverse head and shoulders. We are rejecting a little bit near 22.5 to 23. We could retest our EMAs and retest like 20. Maybe it dips just a little bit as the market bounces a little bit tomorrow. But later on in the upcoming days, I think the VIX might be breaking out for like 28 with this inverse head and shoulders. And that's going to be in correlation with the markets essentially selling off. So SPY could bounce a little bit. Yeah, we could retest 668 to 670. Maybe it bounces a tiny bit. But then there's going to be a risk of rejection as the VIX breaks out. SPY is going to cause that because it might be dipping for 660. If that fails us, we're looking for the lows of October to be retested. Then we'll see if we bounce from there. Same thing with the QQQ. We could bounce, then reject. That is the most likely possibility. On the IWM, we're looking more bearish. Now we got this big rejection. Of course, we're still showing weakness. There's no sign of a true bounce yet. And I'm not sure if this gap gets filled. I remember there was a gap down at 226. Are we about to dump to fill that gap? I think it would be very healthy if we come down. We could bounce a little bit tomorrow morning for essentially 233 to 236, and then we could reject and start dipping back down towards 230. If not, the gap fill to 226, and we'll see if we bounce or not. On ES, we also have kind of like a head and shoulders on the daily. The daily is showing some weakness, and the 4-hour is also declining. Notice that the 4-hour has a left shoulder, a head, and then a right shoulder, and overall, it's showing some weakness. However, there are some wicks forming on ES, which could help this bounce a little bit. We could retest like 67.50 tomorrow, but we keep rejecting near our EMAs. We keep making lower highs. So I would not be surprised if we reject, and then we could retest this low around 65.80 to 65.50. Might be a little bit of a sell-off before this tries to rebound again. So I'll be watching that very closely on ES. On NQ, the same setup exists. This resembles a left shoulder, head, and right shoulder. We're also making lower highs. So as far as ES goes, I just want to call out that you could draw a trend line out like this. This is our resistance. I would not be surprised if we basically retest this. We see a small bounce tomorrow for 25,000, but then we could reject and start falling back down to these lows around 24,600. And then eventually there is going to be a risk of us retesting the lows from October in the lower 24,000s before we form a possible bottom and start to bounce. On Bitcoin, we're bearish. It was trying to bounce and got a rejection as well. And I think that when you look at the Bitcoin chart, this resistance becoming support at 88,000 could be retested. So I think 90,000 and then 88,000 could be potential targets on Bitcoin, if not lower. Tomorrow, it might retest this support becoming resistance at 93,000. Then we could reject back down towards 88,000. So watch that very closely. On Tesla, we're making lower highs and lower lows. I think that there's a strong possibility we could be looking for essentially a retest of 416 to 420 before it rejects again. And overall, it's on a downtrend. I don't think we're ready to break out yet, so we might see a move like this on Tesla. Might come down with the markets temporarily before we see a nice bounce for December, most likely. Nvidia is on a downtrend, unfortunately. Nvidia keeps rejecting. We have this trend line acting as resistance. And as you could tell, it's just continuing to fall and fall and fall. So for Nvidia, might consolidate here between 189 and 186 before it starts to fall back down towards 181. Apple is showing some weakness. We got a double top rejection. We're going to see if we can hold above 270 or not. If we don't, this may continue to fall. So look for a retest of 270. Then we'll see if we turn back down and continue to fall back down towards the low 260s. So be careful. Looking at others out there, I just wanted to say that I think there was a split that just happened to Netflix. We have to like make an adjustment. I think I could just click this right here. Let me just adjust this. Anyways, looking at Netflix, we're technically on a downtrend. As you could tell right over here, we've been making lower highs and lower lows. Um, and if anything, it's still showing some weakness. So even after the stock split, we're still looking kind of weak here. Unless we get back above 112, we're going to be favoring a move back down towards 108 now. On MSTR, we're technically on a downtrend. We're going to see what happens once we retest 212, but overall, I would not be surprised if we end up retesting 205 to 212 before it starts falling back down for like the low 180s. On Celsius, we bounced and got a big rejection. Unfortunately, we're not holding up well. We're favoring 38 or below. On Supermicro, we're showing some weakness. We're making lower highs and lower lows. We also have resistance at 36, and we have support down here at 33. Might bounce before it starts falling back down to 32.5. Palantir is also weak. As you could tell, we're making lower highs and lower lows. Unless we hold above 177, we're going to be favoring a move back down towards 165. On Rivian, we're also showing some weakness. We're favoring some downside. We could be looking for a move back down to 14.2. On SoFi, we're also making lower highs here. Unless we hold above 27.74, we're favoring a move back down to 25.8. Other tickers such as AMD are also showing some weakness in my opinion. AMD is also on a bit of a downtrend. We're going to see if we could hold support at 240. If not, we're looking for 235. ARM is showing a little bit of weakness as well because of the current setup. We could be looking for a test of essentially 136, so be very, very careful as time goes on. I think we may consolidate here before we end up retesting 135 to 136, so be very careful with that. The downside risk is still there, at least nonetheless, and I still see some weakness. I would like ARM to retest 145 for it to bounce. Otherwise, it's still looking a little bit weak. May consolidate before it starts to dip all over again. For PayPal, it's on a bit of a downtrend. Could continue to fall. Might retest 62.8 before it continues to fall back down to 60 flat. Coinbase is looking a bit more bearish. Could be looking for 255 as our target or below. I did mark that earlier. Amazon has support at 231. We got to hold this. If we don't, this imbalance takes us back down towards 224. Meta's on a downtrend. Could be dipping back down to 600 if that fails us. We're looking for 594. Google could retest 284. We're going to see if we bounce or not. Otherwise, we're going to be favoring 281. And then Microsoft is rejecting here. Could be dipping back down towards this 500 area. So be very careful. Oracle is also dipping back down towards this 214 area. And finally, the VIX has an inverse head and shoulders like pattern. There's a left shoulder, head and right shoulder forming an inverse head and shoulders. And this is looking a bit more bullish. So what I think is going to happen is this. The VIX might come down a little bit because there's tough resistance at 23. May retest 20 to 21 before it starts to break out for 25. The 25, sorry, not 25, 28 area. 28 could be retested very soon with the inverse head and shoulders, which is indicative of more downside coming to SPY in the QQQ. And I think that the dollar is also starting to bounce here. It's also forming an inverse head and shoulders, might drop a bit before it starts to bounce, which is another bearish signal. And we're waiting to see what happens with the 10-year. It also has an inverse head and shoulders. So as of right now, the fear involving the Fed and the uncertainty about FOMC and monetary policies causing the equities markets to drop. And we're seeing a very, very big ripple effect across the broader markets. And I think there's a good chance we do try to bounce tomorrow. We see a small bounce attempt before we continue to decline. And I see downside risk for SPY in the QQQ. So I favor downside for now, but keep in mind, if we do get back down to these October lows, this may be a big buying opportunity for the end of the year because the Fed may still completely shock the markets by easing on policy, and that could cause a very monstrous bounce. We're going to see if that ends up being the case, though. So we'll see just to be safe. I'm going to talk more about this prediction later on, but for now, we're taking it one step at a time. Look for a small bounce attempt for 668 to 670 before we continue to decline, and we're going to be looking for a retest of 660 on SPY and a little bounce before we end up retesting 598 on the QQQ, and we'll see if those levels break. With that being said, I thank you all so much for listening. Please have an awesome rest of your guys' days. I'll be back very soon with another update. Please take care, guys, and I'll see you guys in the next one for tomorrow morning before market open. Until then, I wish you the best and peace out.